Tēnā koutou katoa, nau mai, haere mai, I te whānau, kua tai mai nei, I te tautoko e tēnei kaupapa. Ko Janie Walker tōku ingoa. Thank you very much for being here today to support this very special kaupapa. I'm Janie Walker from Community Research. I'd just like to bring us together to start with a karakia. Tuia ki runga, tuia ki raro, tuia ki wahoa, tuia ki roto. Tuia te here tangata, ka rongo te pō, ka rongo te ao, humie, huie, taiki. This webinar is an hour, followed by a 30-minute online get-together for refugee and migrant background researchers and their allies. We will be recording just the webinar section. There'll be an opportunity to share some of your thoughts and questions at the end of the webinar by the chat function. The kaupapa today is hear from us, not about us. The power of refugee and migrant background research. It's a celebration and a launch of our new collection of research focused on refugee background and migrant experiences in Aotearoa. And it's a cradle for researchers and social practitioners from these communities to have their say. We'll be discussing how the collection came about, some research gaps that were found, a challenge and an opportunity that it raises, what is required to keep this collection sustainable, and what is required for research to create systemic change. And what does this ideal world look like? The collection is over 150 pieces of research and knowledge from a variety of sources. In this way, knowledge and lived experience can be expressed and recognised. It's a result of a wonderful collaboration with ChangeMakers Resettlement Forum and Community Research. The collection includes existing research that ChangeMakers held, which they have trusted to Community Research to host and care for, plus the curation of latest research by Susan Elliott and Dr. Irene Ayallo. I'd like to acknowledge Leanne De Beer, an intern at ChangeMakers, for the excellent work that she has contributed to this collection. This collection looks at the whole of a person's life, the fullness of someone's life, to gain the complexity of their lived experience. I'm now very happy to introduce you to our panel, an extraordinary group of women from incredibly interesting backgrounds who have great courage and intelligence and who do a huge amount of work, largely unpaid, for their communities. Batool Arif is originally from Pakistan. She is a community activator at ChangeMakers Resettlement Forum. She is passionate about bringing a system-level change to make Aotearoa a fair and just society for everyone, regardless of race, gender, or religion. Batool, would you like to just give a wave there?
Yeah. Kia ora and assalamu alaikum, everyone.
Thank you, Batool. Dr. Irene Ayallo is a social practitioner, a registered social worker and educator. She currently teaches social practice and social work and community development at Unitec. Irene has undertaken research in a range of areas, including gender-based violence, research methods, and data analysis on a range of topics. Would you like to say hello, Irene?
Jumbo, everybody, and welcome to our session today.
Thank you. Dr. Zhiyan Basharati is an activist, an advocate, champion, and academic. She has established and managed many advocacy and support groups for those from a migrant and refugee background, and is a founder and advisor of the New Zealand National Refugee Youth Council, and she's one busy lady. Zhiyan, would you like to say hello?
Hello, everyone. Thank you for having me.
Dr. Sara Kindon became the first female professor at Human Geography and Development Studies at Victoria University in Wellington in 2019. She has been supporting and carrying out participatory research with people from refugee backgrounds since 2005. She has published widely on participatory, creative, and visual methodologies. Would you like to say hi, Sara?
Kia ora koutou, it's great to be here.
Irene, if we could start with you, and if you could just talk about how did you get involved in this collection, and what was the process in creating it?
Kia ora whānau. So I'm just going to try, and it was quite a complex process, but I'm just going to try to describe a little bit of what we did. So I was invited to co-curate this collection by a friend and a former colleague, Sue Elliott, who is here with us today. And is also a community development practitioner, and with a very keen interest as well in the area of working with refugee and migrant background communities. So, so Sue, I think Sue invited me to be part of this project because of my two backgrounds, so many backgrounds, but two specific that were relevant to this particular collection. So part of that was because I'm from a migrant background. So I have that lived experience of being a migrant in New Zealand. So I originally came to New Zealand as an international student in 2006 and transitioned into employment and now to permanent residency. So I can kind of identify with that migrant journey, some of which are covered in our collection. And the other background that probably made Sue invite me to be part of the collection was because of my professionally, I'm from a community development background and also a social worker, and I have very keen interest in practice and research and working with people at the margins. So I've done research with women, youth, and particularly for and with people from refugee and migrant background. And in that particular capacity, I'm now teaching at Unitec. And one of the courses that I teach, and it's a course that I kind of inherited from Sue Elliott while she was at Unitec, is actually working, teaching a course on social practice with refugee and migrant background communities. So that's just some of the background or some of the stuff that I could bring to the project. And that's why I was involved in the project in the first place. So it comes from a place of lived experience, as well as a place of interest in my capacity as a practitioner and as a researcher. So yeah, so how did we come up with the collection? So so Sue and I met and looked at what community research wanted out of the project in the first place, or out of the collection in the first place. And we looked at this in light of both our experiences of working and teaching, and as well as researching as being researchers. So kind of, you know, to make it unique, but also to give it some validity and legitimacy. So also looking at it from a research perspective. And for me, as somebody, as an ethnic woman, as someone from a migrant background, I wanted a collection that would represent my voice. I was also looking at it from an insider's perspective. So something that would be representative of people from my background. So obviously, as you can imagine, there was quite a lot out there, and community research already had a collection on the old website. So we had a look at what was already there, and also identified more based on other databases and in Aotearoa, New Zealand as well. And we came up with a very long list, and obviously we couldn't include everything, but we did come up with some guiding principles or guiding criteria that would make this particular collection unique. And for those of us who have had a chance to look at it on the community website, community research website, we can see that to the best of my knowledge, it's probably one of the most unique ones in Aotearoa, New Zealand. So in terms of identifying what we wanted to see in the collection. So first of all, we looked at research undertaken by people from these communities. So people like myself, probably people like Zhiyan. So authors or where lead researchers had experiences of migrating to Aotearoa, New Zealand as refugees or just as ethnic people. So that was the first thing we looked at. So that was quite broad, and we found quite a few in that area. And we also looked at research that, in some cases, the research was not, the authors or the lead people were not from this community, so they didn't have the lived experience. However, the research itself was based on the lived experiences of people from this community. So the key participants were from this community. So that's something we also looked at. And we also kind of prioritized what we call recent research. So kind of say from 2015, which was quite challenging as well, as we'll probably talk about later on. So recent research, we prioritized recent research. And we also kind of critically considered in terms of diversity. So we considered topics that we thought that are most relevant to our communities, to people from refugee and migrant background. And in saying that, so there were some areas that and I'll talk about this later on, that we kind of tried to cover each area. So there were research in there was, say, more research in one particular area than other areas, say domestic violence or family violence. We couldn't really get much in that area. So we kind of also made sure that we were covering all the sort of important areas. And we were also looking at, or we also ensured that we kind of cover diversity in terms of the different ethnic groups. So for example, at some point during the collection, we realized that, there were not many perspectives from Asian communities. So we kind of intentionally sought more research in that particular area. So briefly, those were just some of the guiding criteria or guiding principles that we used in coming up with this collection. And generally we just wanted a collection that was unique in the sense that it was representative of the voices, the diversity within refugee and migrant background communities, and covering the most practical issues affecting these communities. And if you look at the introduction to the collection that we put up on the website, it kind of covers a lot of what we wanted to emphasize, or what made this particular collection unique. Yeah.
Thank you very much. Batool, I'd just like to invite you to talk about why was this collaboration with community research important for ChangeMakers?
Yeah. So just a little bit of background of why ChangeMakers needed a platform to bring all these refugee collection to life at one place. ChangeMakers in the past used to host a research directory on refugee-related issues in the past, but somehow it got disconnected, unfortunately. When I joined ChangeMakers, I used to receive a lot of emails and requests from the researchers and from the communities as well. So I was kind of like, okay, there's that huge demand from the communities and the researchers. What can we do? And unfortunately, when I joined in, I was working as an office coordinator. We all work part-time within the community organizations. Not a lot of resources, but yeah, I kind of like, realized the importance of having this collection. So I started working on my free time, getting this collection from archived database, which we fortunately have. And then I started collecting those, and there was a time that we had those collection, and then we needed a platform there we can host that. Again, that was a matter of the resources. So unfortunately, as you all aware of, that community organization needs a lot of most of the organization, we need a lot of help and support and funding from the government. But for the research, it is really hard to find those fundings. So we just start looking, okay, what is out there in the community, who has those expertise, and we started looking for collaboration. And I think we came up with Community Research. Gretchen, who is amazing fellow, colleague, and a friend as well. So she linked us with Community Research, who has a great co-papa, and we quite agree and agree with them, with the co-papa. So that's how we got connected with Community Research. And I think within the community organization, there's a lot of need of collaboration and ChangeMakers strongly believe in that collaboration. So we have to be like more kind of open and about what we have in what resources we have, what we don't. So we just quite open and going back to other communities and community organizations, and I think that's how we got the open-mindedness, and the collaboration is key for ChangeMakers. So that's how we got, and we have now this amazing research collection which we are hosting with Community Research, and that's just wonderful. Yeah.
Thank you. And it's just been an absolute pleasure to work with you and all the team, Jax at ChangeMakers. It's been really wonderful. Irene, just back to you. What gaps did you find when you were looking at both ChangeMakers collection and the work that was being done there, and what you found in this new collection? What gaps in the research?
So one of the things that we found while putting together this collection is that there were quite a lot of pieces that were that we couldn't include. One, because some of them were overly theoretical and academic, and therefore we felt that they could not be easily translated into practice. So I mean, theoretically they were very, very brilliant for academic purposes, but then, yeah, like I said, could not be easily translated into practice. So we couldn't exclude those. And also that there were quite a number of research that were undertaken, particularly if you look at the strict definition of research. There were quite a lot of pieces that have been done by international postgraduate students, and who, for several reasons, including difficulties with getting visas to stay on, have since returned to their countries of origin. And the other thing that I think I highlighted earlier on was the fact that there were areas that we do think that areas of practice, or areas that really do affect our communities. So things like family violence or domestic violence, but there's not so much research in that area. So that was a gap, or that was challenging as well. Yeah.
Thank you. And also, shout out to the New Zealand Family Violence Clearinghouse, who do an amazing work, and perhaps there's a beautiful collaboration there just waiting to happen. Irene, I'd like to now invite you to launch a virtual cutting of a red ribbon in your own way.
All right. So I came up with a blessing, and I want to acknowledge my dad, because I did call my father, who is usually my kind of cultural advisor. And I said to Dad, and he said to me, in launching this particular collection, and for being Kenyan and from a Kenyan perspective, in our writing, in our research, we bring everything that is about us. We bring our ancestors, our communities, and as we say in Ubuntu, or in our most African cultures, that I am because we are. So this is a blessing that sort of incorporates some of the most important aspects of African philosophy, or worldviews, if you like. Yeah. So we give praise to the universe. We give praise to Mother Earth. We give praise to all of nature and its beings. We give praise to all our guiding spirits. We give praise to our ancestors. We give praise to all that came before us in this journey, sharing our joys and our struggles. We give praise to our elders. We give praise to all those who have cared for us, protected us, guided us, and loved us. And may this collection of research inspire us to a greater understanding of our togetherness and solidarity. Amen.
Ngā mihi kia koe. Thank you, Irene. That was beautiful. Just like to move on now to talk about some research methodologies that suit this kind of research, where we bring about the whole of people's lives and we let that guide the research. Irene, maybe briefly for you, why does this kind of methodology help protect refugee migrant background people during the process and then in the sharing of the research?
So when I was thinking about this particular collection and the methodologies that I have used myself and I would ideally like to see used with people from our communities, this particular quote by Bell Hooks came to my mind. So Bell Hooks once said that the kind of research that has been done from our community is kind of, it's sort of like, you know, no need to hear your voice. When I can talk about you, then you can speak about yourself. No need to hear your voice. Only tell me about your pain. I want to know your story. And then I will tell it back to you in a new way that it has become mine, my own. Rewriting you, I write myself anew. I'm still the author, the authority, the colonizer, the speaking subject, and you are now the center of my talk. And yeah, so it's about, yeah, you're giving people the opportunity to tell you their story, tell you who they are, but however rewriting that from your own perspective. So the research methodologies that I see that we were kind of trying to highlight in this collection is moving away from that. It's about giving people we sharing the space of hearing people's stories, but not rewriting it to how we see people, but writing it the way people see themselves. So if we look at our communities from refugee and migrant background, the immigration process adds a very complex layer to some of the issues that we experience, that people experience. So research in these communities is usually about, at the center of it should be self-determination. You know, tino rangatiratanga, as we say in Te Ao Maori. It should be about transformation. It should be about mobilization. It should be about healing. It should be about decolonization. And obviously one of the research methodologies or methods that are found quite useful for addressing those issues, for giving people a voice, creating an opportunity for people to be engaged in the research process from the beginning to the very end, is participatory action research. So it's not about saying, oh, no one else can come into our communities and do research. It's just about acknowledging, you know, our communities being more than just informants, being more than just telling us their stories of pain and then we rewrite it. It's research that begins on the premise that our participants, so our people, are capable of learning, they're capable of changing, and they're capable of developing, transforming their world. They have the capacity to develop solutions for the issues that they face in their community. So that's the kind of research methodology. I could say a bit more, but I think Sara might want to add on to this, but that's the kind of research methodologies that I would ideally use with our communities, and I would ideally like to see people use with our communities.
Thank you. That's very beautifully put. Sara, you're a passionate and highly experienced participatory action research practitioner. What's been your experience in PAR, and why do you think this is a good method for this kind of collection and also moving forward?
Thanks, Janie. So yes, I've been working with participatory action research in one form or another for about 30 years in different contexts, overseas in Costa Rica and Indonesia, and then coming to Aotearoa, working with Te Iwi o Ngāti Hauiti in the central Rangitikei, and then since 2005 with different refugee background communities, particularly refugee background youth and women in Wellington. But a couple of projects also I'll talk about later nationally. For me, participatory action research, like Irene said, is about recognizing that whoever we're working with and trying to understand, they're the experts in their lives. They're the ones who actually know from the inside the lived experience. And they're the ones that actually have that deeper knowing of what needs to change and what they want to see. So for me, working within a participatory action research approach, it's very oriented to social justice. It's very oriented to critical analysis. And it's working always to work alongside, work to uplift, and work to honor the knowledge and the solutions that can be found by the people themselves, whatever that, whatever they're living in. And I think also what's wonderful about participatory action research is that it can take so many different forms because it grows out of the relationships, it grows out of the issues. So it's very dynamic. It's more than a method. It's not something that you pick up a toolbox and you apply. It's something that becomes, it's emergent, it gets created, and it's unique every time, or it should be anyway, if it's truly reflecting the relationships. And at the heart, it's about really preserving the commitment to ethical, respectful relationships. And as Irene mentioned, tino rangatiratanga, self-determination. And so it means that there's also a lot of creativity. And in recent years, I've been doing a lot with different creative methods. So bringing in aspects of photography, or I worked in the iwi context with video, supporting Amber, who's here, Amber Kale, her beautiful work with painting, with body mapping, also working with textile methodologies, sewing to tell stories and understand the migration journey through creating tapestries. Really, the sky's the limit, but it's about keeping the relationship at the heart and negotiating and co-creating a research journey that is truly reflective of what people live and experience and want to see change, and telling those stories in a way that can then impact and influence others.
Lovely, thank you. Zhiyan, you're a great, passionate person for research for former refugee and migrant background communities to be done by researchers who have that lived experience.
Mm.
Why is that important to you?
Kia ora, thank you. Giving a voice to people from refugees and migrant background in this area is very important. It's one thing to be a researcher and to do good research, but it's another thing when you are a researcher and you have lived experience. So when you're on the ground in the grassroots, there's a lot of things that you see that often in the universities people miss because they're not there. And migrants and refugees, obviously, there's a lot of people coming into New Zealand, and we go through the New Zealand education system. We are brought up here. And it's an asset for New Zealand that these people stay here and are valued. So we have a collection of knowledge that is created by our community, because they are the ones who knows what's best for us. And if you do a research paper on, say, an African community or an Afghani community, the methodology that you create, it's important because there are so many different tribes within each community. And there are so many different leaders within that community, and each tribe respond differently to a certain situation. So for the future generations who are our third, in my family, we will have third generations of former refugees. What we create for their future is really important in terms of how we are brought up and our values, and what we put out there to build a foundation for social cohesion. When we are looking at diversity, what does that look like to us? When we're looking at multiculturalism, what does that look like? So I think it's really important, going back to the question, that we understand who is in the community and who have a lived experience, and who are passionate about working with refugees and migrants, and we keep these people here. Over the years, I've seen a lot of people move overseas, and it's tough to keep people here because they are an asset, and we shouldn't be losing them to overseas. And I'll stop there.
Thank you. Batool, what's your response to this? I know you have had experiences of this as well, about the importance of, but you also talk about, that you need allies, and I think we'll get onto, a question about allies a bit later on, but why is this important to you?
I think it's quite important to have the researchers from our own communities. That's kind of like, at one level, we are removing that power distance, usually like, for the community, especially the grassroots, when we go and connect with the communities for any project, for any research, for anything, there is a power distance. And that is not what people on the grassroots feel. That I think many of us, like Zhiyan, might be Irene, and I myself has experienced that power distance and experienced power distance on daily basis. So that is something we have to be really mindful of that as well. Providing that safe space to the communities, it's very important for us. And somehow I feel there is a big gap in the research space, because if a researcher who is from different community, from not with the lived experiences, that's one thing that our communities mostly struggle, that for the researchers it might be just a story, just a report, or just a paper for them to get to the other level. But for us, that is not just a story, that is the whole life, the experiences that we want to tell the world, that this is what we go through. And unfortunately, I feel, there's a good selection of collections here. And I think I might go into the next level of the question. I feel like, how are we going to use this research? Because from the last 20 years until now, we see, especially the former refugee communities, we see no such changes has been made. Recently ChangeMakers has done, or still doing a research around the acceptance, belonging, and inclusion of refugee background communities. And it was quite shocking and alarming to see the themes that are coming out are mainly discrimination, racism, and exclusion. And if we see the past research papers from the 20 years before, the themes were same. So it is kind of so disappointing to see that in 20 years' time, we have done nothing. And even the policies which has been made for us, we were not included in the process, like the resettlement strategies, or even the existing immigration policies that has been made for us that are not culturally appropriate. Our communities go through a lot of that just because of these policies, where people not at the center of those policies. So I think that's quite a lot of work has to be done, especially in New Zealand in that sector, because we want things to be changed. And I think having these research research to validate our voices. We can like literally go to the government and tell them, the policymakers, that yes, the policies that which you made and has not even been reviewed like 10, 12, 20 years before, there is time to change. And if we have this research to prove that, I think that's kind of like, give us more courage and hope to change the policies that's not working for us. And we don't like, I think I should stop. Let others start.
Well, I don't think you should ever stop, but this is a 1 hour webinar. So thank you so much for your, I feel like giving you a Zoom hug. Here is a Zoom hug. Zhiyan, you have also another perspective on this around the work that you're doing at Unitec around compulsory cultural competency for researchers who are, or social workers who are not from the communities that they seek to tautoko and serve. Would you like to say something about that?
I think you mean me, Janie, not Zhiyan. You mean me.
Apologies, you, Irene, fabulous woman.
Yeah. So I guess it's sort of it's a challenge, but it's also an area that I do celebrate. That as part of picking up from what Batool was talking about, that we need to keep everything current, so policies, and that includes our training institutions as well. And as part of that, a few of us, and I ngamihi to Sue Elliott, who is with us today, that at Unitec, we started that advocacy, we started that campaign. So like I said, one of the courses that I currently teach is on, we are part of training social workers, so people who are going to be going out there and working with our communities. So in the past, we've had the course, but it was an elective. So not everybody had to do it. Not all our graduates had to do it. And the majority of the time, in fact, all the time, we ended up only having people from migrant and refugee background choosing the course, which kind of makes a difference, but it's like preaching to the choir anyway. So it was a very long process and through advocacy. So at the moment, I'm celebrating the fact that now the course is compulsory. So all our students have to do it. And that gives me a sense of fulfillment. It gives me a sense of comfort, knowing that the social workers that we are training are going to have that cultural competency, that skill to be able to work effectively with our communities from a refugee and migrant background. Yeah.
Wonderful, thank you, Irene. So now I'd like to move into a kind of an area around what is required for systemic change. So it's awesome to have this beautiful research, but we need to move into action. There's no point research sits there, that sits in institutions, that doesn't get out to communities for action. So Zhiyan, I'd like to invite you to talk a bit about what is required for systemic change.
This the research in the area is in particular for refugees. It's a long time coming movement. And for me, I've just started with Professor Herb and Dr. Nadira to do some research on entrepreneurship. And I like seeing that universities have picked up and individuals have picked up research based on these vulnerable communities. Systematic change, it's not just in our education institutions. It has to happen within government, within the institutions, where there may be community groups or within a city council or nationally within government, because really the population of New Zealand is becoming multi-ethnic. I wouldn't call us diverse. Yes, there is diversity in certain workplaces, but as a country, we are not diverse. Neither we are not also multicultural. We have to work really hard to get there. And in order to become multicultural, then diverse, then we lead into social cohesion. So we have to be very careful when we say these two words, because you need to think about the communities and what changes we need to make in these levels. So for over a decade, I've been advocating in the community. First 5 years, I presented in the resettlement strategy forum for immigration and refugees. For 5 years, they repeated the same thing. 4 years, I was a guest speaker there. We were talking about solutions or what change needs to happen. And every year, with a different theme, we repeat the same thing. And whenever we suggested we need to collect data, we need to look at research to see what's happening on the ground. Oh, it's too expensive. We need a lot of resources. I think running those programs at a forum is more expensive than the research. So why don't we put some effort into making a plan for the next 5 to 10 years and look at our community and see what's going on and what changes we need to create. So now we are looking at social cohesion. Within the refugee community, we're not even there to discuss social cohesion. We are looking at the New Zealand National Refugee Resettlement Strategy, and we're looking at family reunification, and we're looking at issues that we're having with asylum seekers and the way they have been treated in our system. So when we are moving too fast, we haven't done the work on the ground yet to get to where we are going. The government needs to really put a lot of effort into research, into, again, keeping people here who are educated in New Zealand and who can lead the narrative, because we have a long way to go, and it's time to stop adapting what works best overseas and then adapting their framework for New Zealand. We are very unique in New Zealand. New Zealand is a very, very young country, okay? So previously, people who migrated here were from England, Scotland, Wales, and Ireland. Now we have over 213 ethnic minorities living here. If you think about that, for me, I worry about the future of what New Zealand could look like when it comes to social cohesion. So if we do not change systematically, then we have an issue on our hands where multiculturalism can either become a hostile, aggressive type of environment, or we can become a society where we understand one another. We acknowledge each community for the beauty that they present. So there has to be a fine balance. And I'm not saying that all the work needs to be just done by government. We are doing the work in the community. We are working very hard. We are not resourced. We are not funded. We are doing what we can for the future of our country, because our kids are the future generations and leaders of New Zealand. So I'll stop there, but as I said, there's a lot of groundwork that needs to be happening. I love the collection that's happening at the moment to see what work has been done nationally in New Zealand. And I acknowledge all the researchers and the people who are doing work for the community and looking at these vulnerable groups, because we have a long way to go.
Thank you, Zhiyan. Sara, I know you have some incredible experience around the institutional change that's needed. For example, more scholarships for postgrad students. I'm just wondering if you wouldn't mind putting some of your comments in the chat so we can get onto this sort of ideal world perspective on what it could look like. But just a shout out to Community Research. We're investigating a research broker role to keep our collections participatorily sustainable, and then how they then move into action. So if anyone out there would love to hear more about that, please contact me at Community Research. So I'd just like to ask all the panelists, just so we spend a minute or two talking about what does an ideal world look like when we have research done in a way that you think is honourable and respectful and sustainable and brings about transformation in these communities that everyone in a goodwill way seeks to serve. What does it actually look like? I'd just like to maybe go back to you, Irene, and just say a couple of things, or focus on one, whatever you'd like. What does this ideal world look like?
I think for me, to begin with, an ideal world for me is a world where people going into these particular communities. So like I said at the beginning, not necessarily saying that you have to be from a refugee and migrant background to do research and to work with the communities. However, saying that for me, an ideal world would be people working with our communities to have a very well-informed view of the social worlds of our people. And as Batool said, that these are not just stories. What our people share are not just stories, they are actually lived experiences. So having a very good understanding of the social world and understanding their perspectives on different issues, as we probably know that there are a lot of issues that affect most people in Aotearoa, New Zealand. Our ethnic communities will have a very different perspective from their cultural understanding. So respecting those perspectives and interpreting those perspectives not from where we are standing, but from where in a kind of a co-constructed research environment. So ideally, I'd like us to have a co-constructed research environment, or a co-facilitated practice environment, so involving both perspectives. And I think, like as I pointed out, it will help us, address issues such as lumping refugees and migrants in one category all the time. I still get surprised, even after many years of living in New Zealand, that people still don't know the difference. And for me, the important thing about not lumping everybody in one group is about support services, designing support services, because we know that the different immigration pathways have come with different experiences. And if we lump people in one group, then we are not actually addressing their needs that are specific to, say, former refugees and are specific to migrants. So in an ideal world, I'd love us to have that understanding so that we are able to have appropriate support services and intervention strategies.
Thank you. Batool, what's one thing that's in your ideal world?
Yeah, well, I'm not a researcher, so I can just talk as a member of the community. What ideal will look like to me is that for the organizations especially, and most especially for the government organizations, don't employ people just for the sake of diversity. It's really, really important for them how to work with these diverse communities and how to listen to them, and how make opportunities for them to listen to them and make and provide the pathways where they can be themselves and trust their abilities, and don't judge them, and don't let them to prove themselves on every step of their lives that we are capable of so many things. Don't just judge us just by how well English we can speak. Please don't do that. If we are really committed about bringing change in the system, so we have to work in partnership, not just as a subgroup to any organization. We don't want to be a subgroup. We want to work as ally, as partners. So embrace that diversity. Please give them safe space where they can be themselves and talk about the hard, uncomfortable stuffs. Give them the opportunity where they can talk about the challenges, the difficulties that they face on every step of their life, if we are committed to bring change in the society. Otherwise, no matter how many diverse people you will employ in your organizations, if you don't give them the opportunity, nothing will change. And after 20 years later, we will be talking again about this diversity and all this having who is, and nothing will change if we are not able to share that power with the communities. I don't think so. The change can happen. So we have to be a good allies. We have to be a good partners, and we have to share the power. We have to be ready for that stage to share power with the communities, where they'll be able to make decisions for themselves. Which so.
Thank you. Zhiyan, would you like to respond in a minute, within 1 minute, something that is in your ideal world?
My ideal world. I think people come to New Zealand with this vision of inclusiveness and fairness and peacefulness. Everybody who come here, they have a vision of what New Zealand looks like. And I just want to build a society where we have access to resources and we give chances to people. And we no longer live in a world where we rely on tokenism to make it look like we are diverse, as Batool said. And don't use refugees and migrants and tokens. Utilize their strength and create the change that we need to see in New Zealand, so that we can become a socially cohesive society.
Thank you. And Sara, what's in your ideal world?
Oh, too many things for a minute, but the top three perhaps. For me, in this space, it's about doing the work to build and support capacity and priorities of my colleagues, like those on the panel speaking today and many of you here. But it's also about doing the work with people like me. So calling the leaders and institutions to account, doing what I can to raise awareness for the next generation of researchers to be more mindful, to be more aware. It's also about finding ways to support and grow the research capacity that Zhiyan talked about. And I know that Irene and Batool care about deeply. So trying to find ways to get more scholarships at postgraduate level to really increase the number of masters and PhD researchers who know the lived experience, but understand different ways of researching, who can go on to affect change and become the trainers of future generations. So that's what I'd like to see.
Thank you. Would anyone like to pose a question? Sue's just asked what community research is doing to make the collection sustainable. We in a co-collaboration way, co-creation way, we don't know. We're going to listen to the community about what they need. So that is our approach. We will listen to what people need. We need resources to do this. We all live off the smell of an oily rag. If there are policymakers who really need this research for their mahi, and you are in a position to fund and come along with us, please do let us know. How will the communities know about community research? Thanks, Sue. Well, every time we do a webinar, we have a proactive engagement. So we're hoping now that we've reached a whole lot of different communities, but everyone is a champion. We're just a container for this mahi, so everyone also has the resources to inform their own communities, and we will be inviting people to connect. We're always, I know people say this all the time, we'll listen to you and do something about it. Actually, we do listen to you. We will hear you, and we will do something about it. So please do get in touch. Oh, thank you. Prabha's just said the Race Relations Commissioner is leading a program in developing a national action plan against racism. Would love this group to contribute to the survey. That's wonderful. Every single person you see in front of you is really busy. They do a lot of mahi aroha work outside their communities. They do research outside their communities. So if you would like to support them in their further mahi, that would be wonderful. Please do get in touch with us or people individually. Thank you, everybody. We did talk about ways to keep this collection sustainable. And Zhiyan, you talked about how we need to nurture researchers, this cohort, past cohorts, future cohorts. How can we do that? You've just started a new, as a refugee research centre. Would you like to talk just briefly a little bit about that?
So actually, for a long time, the reason why I got into becoming an academic was because of doing community research to influence policy making changes that need to happen systematically. So over the years, there's been a lot of people that I looked up to who were academics, but they left the country, who were former refugees. So I wanted to, so over the years, going around the country, you meet a lot of former refugees. And now that I've met the right people who have similar values and are passionate about creating that narrative that we need to make for research, we decided it's the right time to build an organization called Refugee Research Center, Research by Refugees for Refugees. So we are giving the platform for former refugees to flourish so that they are resourced, they are valued as an academic member or a community member who are working really hard to create change in New Zealand. And it gets, if you're not resourced, it gets really hard. And along the way, you have other commitments. You need to look after your family. And if you're not resourced, the pathway shifts. And I don't want that to happen to former refugees who are in the academic field. I want them to feel supported. I want them to have a foundation where they get into work and they love what they're doing and they're being paid for it. Not just all the time researchers and within the refugee community, it's always take, and there's no give. You're just emptying their bucket. And if they don't feel valued, they're not going to stay here. And a lot of people are being recruited to Australia, and it's sad to see that. So the Refugee Research Center, we just a couple of weeks ago got registered. So I'm really proud of the team who are on there, and soon we will be releasing our website and more information about that. But regardless of where I go in the future, I'm always going to be working on that organization because it's a passion of mine. This is my home. This is where my family lives. And I really want to create a better future for our communities here.
Thank you, Zhiyan. And we've talked about this before, but community research is right behind you.
Thank you.
So I wanted to invite the panel to give a summary, but I think we'll move on. Thank you, everyone. I know some of you wanted to have questions. If you do want to contribute to this people-centered research approach and knowledge gathering, where research is transformative, where it's based on relationships, where it's not extractive, and it continues after the research projects process, please do get in touch. I would like to give the last word to Batool. Would you like to have the last word, Batool? So
from me, I think I just want to say that as a community, former refugee community and migrant communities, they go through a lot of challenges with the resettlement. We need things to be changed, which are not working. We don't want people to get discriminated by the way they look. We don't want to face them racism. We want to see a fair and just society, and that is our right to see what we want for ourselves and for our future generation. We don't want to see our kids, our future generation, to go through the same that what we have been through. So I think it's really important to come up together and work together to make a fair and just society for everyone in Aotearoa. Thank you.
Thank you. To you, our beautiful panel, ngā mihi kia koutou, you are beautiful, you are courageous, and I hope you know that we'll always be here to support you. There's a couple of other people I'd like to thank, Janie Moore and Grace from Community Research, Rich and Youth Art for your fabulous support, this kaupapa more generally, and also for me and everyone else here. Some early contributors, Vika Nabuka, Tayo Angelica and Janet Miller, and also Susan Elliott. You are a taonga, you are a treasure. Thank you for supporting everyone. Just like to finish with a karakia. kia whaikaria te tapu kia watiaia te ara, kia tūriki whakatahaia, kia tūriki whakataia homie, hui e, tai ki e. Restrictions are moved aside so the pathways are clear to return to everyday activities.